The crystal goblet trembled in Maeve Wolfsong's pale hands as her sisters shoved her forward, their laughter sharp as broken glass against the marble floors of the great hall. The red silk of her dress whispered against her skin, a crimson flame against the winter white of her hair, as she stumbled toward the raised dais where the Alpha King sat in shadows and silence. Her eldest sister, Rowena, had painted her lips blood red and wore a gown cut so low it barely clung to her shoulders. The middle sister, Isolde, had threaded gold through her dark hair and perfumed herself with oils that made the air thick and cloying. They had schemed for weeks, these sisters who shared her blood but not her kindness, plotting how to capture the attention of Marcus Dawnreaver, the Alpha King whose very name made lesser wolves bow their heads. But when the moment came to serve him, when the great feast demanded someone present the king with the first chalice of wine, they had seized Maeve by her slender wrists and thrust the goblet into her trembling fingers. "Go," Rowena had hissed, her nails digging crescents into Maeve's pale skin. "You're the Omega. You serve. That's all you're good for." Isolde's laugh had been cruel music. "Maybe if you're lucky, he'll glance at you before his eyes find someone worthy." So Maeve walked, her heart a caged bird beating against her ribs, her eyes downcast as an Omega should be, her footsteps silent as snowfall. The great hall stretched before her like an endless winter night, packed with wolves from every corner of the realm, their eyes tracking her movement, their whispers rustling like dead leaves. The chandeliers above cast fractured light across the stone, illuminating tapestries that depicted ancient battles, legendary bonds, fates written in starlight and blood. She could feel him before she saw him. The Alpha King's presence was a gravitational force, pulling at something deep within her chest, something she had never felt before and could not name. The air around the dais seemed charged, electric, as though lightning waited just beneath the surface of the world. Maeve climbed the 3 steps to the throne, her knees weak, her breath shallow. She kept her gaze fixed on the goblet in her hands, watching how the wine caught the light like liquid rubies, how her reflection wavered in its dark surface. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the great hearth. "Your wine." Silence fell like snow over the hall. Even the fire seemed to still its dance. And then, for the first time in her 18 years, Maeve Wolfsong made the mistake of looking up. Marcus Dawnreaver was a man carved from midnight and storm. He sat upon his throne of ancient oak and iron, broad-shouldered and tall even in repose, his presence filling the space around him like darkness fills a room when the last candle dies. His hair, black as a raven's wing, fell past his shoulders in waves that spoke of wildness barely contained. His beard was trimmed close, but couldn't soften the sharp angle of his jaw, the brutal beauty of his face. His eyes, gray as winter seas, had been studying the crowd with an expression of profound boredom. Until they found her. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. The moment their eyes met, something shattered in the air between them. Maeve felt it like a physical thing. A golden thread pulled taut. A song she had never heard but had been humming all her life suddenly given voice. Her breath caught. The goblet nearly slipped from her fingers. The Alpha King's expression transformed. The boredom vanished, replaced by something raw and startled, something that looked almost like recognition, like a man finding something he had lost before he even knew to search for it. He leaned forward slowly, his massive hands gripping the arms of his throne, his gray eyes widening with an intensity that made Maeve's knees buckle. She caught herself, steadied her hands, and extended the goblet toward him with all the grace she could summon. Her sister's laughter had died somewhere behind her. The entire hall held its breath. Marcus Dawnreaver reached out, and when his fingers brushed against hers as he took the goblet, a spark of energy passed between them, bright and sharp as static shock, warm as summer sun on bare skin. Maeve gasped softly. The king's eyes flashed gold for just an instant, the wolf rising to the surface, recognizing, claiming, knowing. "Your name," he said, his voice deep and rough as distant thunder. The wine sat forgotten in his hand. "Tell me your name." Maeve swallowed hard, her throat dry as autumn leaves. "Maeve, your majesty. Maeve Wolfsong. Maeve," he repeated as though tasting each syllable, as though her name were a prayer he had forgotten how to speak. His gaze traveled over her face, her white hair catching lamplight like starshine, her eyes wide and gray-green as a storm-touched sea. The red dress seemed to glow against her pale skin, crimson and snow, fire and ice. From behind her, Rowena's voice rang out, honey-sweet and poisonous. "Your Majesty, our youngest sister is clumsy and simple. She begged to be allowed to serve you, though we told her she wasn't worthy. Please forgive her presumption." Isolde stepped forward, her golden hair shimmering, her smile calculated to devastate. "We, your loyal subjects, would be honored to attend to your needs personally. Our sister is merely an Omega, after all. Surely you would prefer company more befitting your status." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus Dawnreaver's eyes never left Maeve's face, but the warmth that had been building there turned to ice when he finally, slowly, turned his attention to her sisters. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind of power that could break mountains and bend rivers. "I did not ask for your names," he said quietly. "I did not ask for your presence. I asked for hers." Rowena's face flushed crimson. Isolde's smile froze and cracked like ice over a deep lake. The court erupted in whispers, a storm of shock and speculation that swept through the hall like wind through dead trees. Marcus turned back to Maeve, and his expression softened, the brutal edges giving way to something that looked almost like wonder. "Step closer," he said. And it was not a command but a request, gentle as he knew how to make his voice. "Please." Maeve's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct told her to run, but something stronger, something that lived in her bones and sang in her blood, told her to stay. She took one step forward, then another, until she stood close enough to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, close enough to smell pine and snow and something wild clinging to his skin. "You feel it too," he said softly, meant only for her ears. "Don't you?" It was not a question. Maeve nodded, unable to speak, unable to deny the truth that thrummed between them like a living thing. She had heard stories all her life about the bond, the sacred connection that tied true mates together, soul to soul, wolf to wolf. She had never expected to find it. Omegas rarely did. They were meant to serve, to support, to fade into the background of greater wolves' lives. But here she stood, trembling before the Alpha King of all the realm, feeling a connection so powerful it threatened to unmake her. "I need you to stay," Marcus said, his hand lifting slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished. When she didn't, his fingers touched her cheek, rough calluses against soft skin, warm and gentle despite the strength she could feel coiled in every line of his body. "Will you stay?" Behind her, Rowena hissed something vicious. Isolde's voice rose in protest. The court buzzed with scandal and shock, but Maeve heard none of it. The world had narrowed to the man before her, to the warmth of his touch, to the bond that sang between them like starlight made sound. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll stay." Something fierce and triumphant flashed across Marcus Dawnreaver's face. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, gentle but possessive, and he stood from his throne, rising to his full height, towering over her but somehow making her feel safe rather than small. "Then you are under my protection," he said, his voice carrying across the silent hall. "Let it be known that Maeve Wolfsong is mine to guard, mine to care for, mine to defend. Anyone who harms her, insults her, or forces her to act against her will, answers to me." And his eyes, glowing gold now with the power of his wolf, swept over Rowena and Isolde with lethal promise. Is that understood? The sisters paled. The court bowed. And Maeve, who had spent 18 years being invisible, being small, being forgotten, felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, but blooming, like spring after endless winter, like dawn after the longest night. The feast continued around them, but Marcus did not return to his throne. Instead, he kept his hand at the small of Maeve's back, a point of warmth and connection, and guided her to a seat beside his own, a place that had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. He poured her wine with his own hands, served her food from his own plate, and spoke to her in low tones that made the rest of the hall fade into irrelevance. "You're shaking," he observed, his brow furrowing with concern. "Are you cold? Are you afraid?" "Both," Maeve admitted, her hands wrapped around the goblet he'd given her. "And neither. I don't understand what's happening. You've never learned about the mate bond." It was a statement, not a question, and there was anger beneath it, not directed at her, but at a world that had failed to teach her about her own heritage. "I've heard stories," she said softly, "but I'm an Omega. We don't usually find true mates. We're meant to serve the pack, not to be chosen by one." Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his beard. "Who told you that?" "Everyone," Maeve said simply. "It's just how things are." The Alpha King leaned close, his gray eyes intense, his voice low and fierce. "Then everyone is wrong. The bond doesn't care about designation. It doesn't care about status or rank or what anyone thinks should be. It cares about souls that fit together. And yours, Maeve Wolfsong." His hand covered hers, dwarfing her pale fingers. "Fits with mine like two halves of the same whole." Maeve felt tears prick her eyes, though she couldn't say if they were from joy or fear, or the overwhelming weight of being truly seen for the first time in her life. "How can you be sure?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you walked into this hall with your head held high, even though your sisters tried to break you. I know you served me with grace, even though you were afraid. I know your hands are gentle, and your heart is kind. And I know that when I look at you, something I thought was dead inside me remembers how to feel again." The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and heavy and real. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw past the brutal beauty, past the power and the darkness. She saw loneliness. She saw exhaustion. She saw a man who had carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders for so long, he had forgotten what it felt like to be light. "Tell me about yourself," she said softly. "Please." Marcus's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features, as though no one had asked him that question in longer than he could remember. He leaned back slightly, his thumb absently stroking the back of her hand, his gaze distant as he chose his words. "I became Alpha King when I was barely 20, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "My father died in battle. My mother followed him within a week, her heart broken beyond repair. I inherited a kingdom on the brink of war, packs fighting amongst themselves, territory disputes tearing us apart from within. I've spent the last decade holding everything together by force and fear, because those were the only tools I had." He paused, his gray eyes finding hers again. "I've been alone, Maeve. Surrounded by thousands, but alone. Until tonight." The rawness in his voice made Maeve's chest ache. Without thinking, she turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. His hand engulfed hers completely, but his grip was careful, protective, infinitely gentle despite the strength she could feel coiled within him. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she whispered. Marcus's eyes closed for a brief moment, and when they opened again, they shimmered with something that might have been tears if Alpha Kings were allowed to cry. "Neither do you," he said. The feast carried on into the night, music swelling from the minstrel's gallery, dancers whirling across the floor in patterns ancient as the moon. Maeve watched it all from her seat beside the king, feeling as though she existed in two worlds at once. One foot in the reality she'd always known, one foot in a future she couldn't yet imagine. Her sisters had disappeared from sight, probably dismissed by some silent command from Marcus, or retreating on their own to lick their wounded pride. Marcus never left her side. He explained the significance of various courtiers, pointed out allies and rivals with dry humor that surprised her, made her laugh despite the strangeness of the situation. He brought her delicacies from the feast, watching her face carefully to see what she enjoyed, taking note of every small preference. When the fire burned low and the night grew cold, he draped his own fur-lined cloak across her shoulders without a word, the heavy fabric still warm from his body, smelling of pine and snow and something indefinably him. It was close to midnight when he finally stood, offering her his hand. "Walk with me," he said. "I want to show you something." Maeve placed her hand in his, marveling at how natural the gesture felt, as though their hands had been made to fit together. He led her from the great hall, away from the noise and the eyes, down corridors lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on ancient stone. Guards bowed as they passed. Servants pressed themselves against walls, everyone giving the Alpha King and his mysterious companion space and respect. They climbed a spiral staircase, higher and higher, until Marcus pushed open a heavy wooden door, and cold night air rushed in to greet them. They emerged onto a balcony high above the kingdom. The world spread out below them in patterns of light and shadow, forests like dark oceans, mountains like frozen waves against the star-strewn sky. "This is my favorite place," Marcus said quietly, standing beside her at the stone railing. "When the weight gets too heavy, I come here. The height reminds me that I'm small. The stars remind me that I'm temporary. It helps." Maeve looked up at him, seeing how the moonlight caught in his dark hair, how it softened the harsh lines of his face. "It's beautiful," she said. "So are you," he replied without hesitation, turning to face her fully. "In the moonlight, you look like something out of legend, like the moon itself took human form just to torment me with everything I thought I could never have." "You keep saying things like that," Maeve whispered, her cheeks flushing despite the cold. "But you don't know me. How can you be so certain?" "Because the bond doesn't lie," Marcus said, his hands coming up to frame her face, his touch reverent, as though she were something precious and breakable. "Because I've been alive for 30 years, Maeve, and I've never felt anything like what I feel when I look at you. Because my wolf recognized you the instant your eyes met mine, and my wolf is never wrong about the things that matter." He paused, his thumb stroking gently across her cheekbones, his gray eyes searching hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "But more than that," he continued, "because I see you. I see your courage. I see your gentleness. I see the way you held yourself together even when your sisters tried to tear you down. I see the light in you, Maeve, and it calls to the darkness in me like dawn calls to the night." Maeve's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this, as though she mattered, as though she were worth poetry and passion and promises. "Your darkness doesn't frighten me," she said softly. "It should," Marcus replied, but there was relief in his voice, raw and real. "I've done terrible things to protect this kingdom. I've been ruthless and brutal and unforgiving. With you, though," his voice dropped to barely a whisper, "I want to be gentle. I want to be worthy of the light I see in your eyes." "You already are," Maeve said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Marcus made a sound low in his chest, something between a growl and a sigh, and then he was kissing her, his lips claiming hers with a hunger that bordered on desperation. Maeve's eyes fluttered closed, her hands coming up to grip the front of his tunic as the world tilted and rearranged itself around them. The bond between them flared to life fully, No longer a tentative thread, but a living thing, golden and bright and unbreakable, binding them together in ways that transcended flesh and bone. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cradling her face as though she might disappear if he let go. "I will never let anyone hurt you again," he promised, his voice fierce and low. "I will never let you feel small or invisible or unwanted. You are mine, Maeve Wolfsong, and I am yours, and that is the only truth that matters." Tears spilled down Maeve's cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that washed away years of pain and loneliness. "I'm yours," she echoed, "and you're mine." The night stretched on around them, cold and clear and infinite. Below, the kingdom slept. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. And on the balcony between earth and sky, two souls who had been searching without knowing finally found home in each other. The days that followed were both dream and trial. Marcus moved Maeve into chambers adjacent to his own, rooms that had been empty since his mother's death, rooms with windows that faced the sunrise and walls painted in shades of cream and gold. He filled them with books when he learned she loved to read, with soft blankets when he noticed how she sought warmth, with flowers from his own gardens because he loved the way her face lit up at their colors. But for every moment of tenderness, there were reminders that the bond between an Alpha King and an Omega was unprecedented and controversial, the court whispered. Rival packs sent messages questioning Marcus's judgment, and Maeve's sisters, humiliated and vengeful, began to spread poison wherever they could. Rowena told anyone who would listen that Maeve had used dark magic to ensnare the king, that she was a manipulative creature who had seduced him for power. Isolde claimed that the bond was false, that Maeve was delusional, and the king was merely bewitched by her unusual appearance. They gathered allies, other high-born wolves who resented an Omega rising above her station, who saw in Maeve's elevation a threat to the natural order they'd always known. Marcus heard the whispers. His rage was cold and controlled, but Maeve could feel it through the bond, a storm held barely in check. She found him one evening in his study, standing before the fire with his hands braced on the mantel, his shoulders tight with tension. "You want to hurt them," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "I want to destroy them," Marcus replied without turning, his voice low and dangerous. "I want to make an example of everyone who has spoken your name with disrespect. I want them to understand what it means to insult what belongs to me." Maeve crossed the room to him, her footsteps silent on thick carpet, and placed her hand on his back. She could feel the heat of him through his shirt, could feel the rapid beat of his heart. "But you won't," she said. "No," he agreed, turning finally to look at her, his gray eyes molten silver. "Because you wouldn't want me to. Because you have a mercy in you that I lack. Because you make me want to be better than the monster I've had to become." "You're not a monster," Maeve said firmly. "You're a king who's carried an impossible burden alone for too long. There's a difference." Marcus reached for her, pulling her into his arms with a need that bordered on desperation. She went willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against his chest, and listening to the steady thunder of his heartbeat. They stood like that for a long time, the fire crackling beside them, the weight of the kingdom held at bay by the simple act of being together. "I love you," Marcus said into her hair, the words rough and unpracticed, as though he'd never spoken them before and wasn't sure he was doing it right. "I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other in the ways that should matter. But I love you, Maeve, and I need you to know that before anything else happens." Maeve pulled back just enough to look up at him, her gray-green eyes shimmering with emotion. "I love you too," she whispered. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe the moment I saw you. Maybe slowly, with every kindness, every touch, every word. But I do. I love you." The kiss they shared was slower this time, deeper, a promise and a claim and a surrender all at once. When they finally parted, Marcus rested his forehead against hers, his hands tangled in her white hair, and breathed out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You've unmade me," he said. "You've taken every defense I ever built and turned them to dust, and I've never been more grateful for anything in my life." But their peace was short-lived. 3 days later, as winter tightened its grip on the kingdom, an envoy arrived from the Northern Pack, one of the largest and most powerful in the realm. Their alpha, Kristoff Ironjaw, was known for his traditional views and his disdain for anything he perceived as weakness. He had come, he announced in the Great Hall with all the court assembled, to challenge Marcus's fitness to rule. The charge was simple and devastating. By bonding with an Omega, by elevating her above her station, Marcus had shown that he valued personal desire over the good of the kingdom. "An Alpha King," Kristoff declared, his voice booming off the stone walls, "must mate with strength, not weakness. Must choose a partner who can rule beside him, not a servant who can barely stand in his presence without trembling." Marcus sat on his throne, his expression carved from ice, his power radiating from him in waves that made lesser wolves cower. And yet, Maeve could feel through the bond the hurt beneath his rage, the fear that perhaps they were right, perhaps he had been selfish, perhaps he had doomed his kingdom for the sake of his own heart. She stood beside him, where she had stood every day since that first night, wearing a gown of deep blue that made her skin glow like moonlight, her white hair braided with silver thread. She could feel every eye in the hall upon her, judging her, finding her wanting, seeing only what she lacked rather than what she was. Kristoff Ironjaw turned his attention to her, his lips curling in something that might have been a smile on a friendlier face. "And you, little Omega, what makes you think you're worthy to stand beside an Alpha King? What strength do you bring? What power? What use are you to this kingdom beyond warming his bed?" The words were designed to humiliate, to reduce her to nothing. Maeve felt her cheeks flush, felt her hands tremble at her sides. Beside her, Marcus had gone utterly still, a predator about to strike, but she could feel through the bond that he was waiting, giving her the chance to speak for herself first. Maeve lifted her chin, straightened her spine, and met Kristoff Ironjaw's contemptuous gaze with calm gray-green eyes. "You're right," she said, her voice quiet but clear, carrying to every corner of the hall. "I have no physical strength to match an alpha. I have no army behind me, no territory, no wealth. By all traditional measures, I am nothing." She paused, feeling Marcus's attention focused completely on her, feeling the bond between them pulse with something warm and bright. But strength isn't only measured in how hard you can hit or how loud you can command. Strength is also measured in how you rise after being pushed down, in how you remain kind when the world has been cruel, in how you choose mercy when vengeance would be easier. And by those measures, her voice grew stronger. "I am not weak at all." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Kristoff's expression darkened. Maeve continued, her heart racing, but her voice steady. "As for what I bring to the king in this kingdom, I bring loyalty that cannot be bought. I bring honesty that cannot be corrupted. I bring a perspective that an alpha might miss because I have lived my life being overlooked, being underestimated, being forgotten. I see the wolves that others don't see. I hear the voices that others don't hear. And I will stand beside Marcus Dawnreaver, not because I seek power, but because I love him." And sometimes, her eyes swept the hall. Love is the strongest thing of all. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. It was Lord Aldrich, an elderly wolf who had served Marcus's father, who had seen kings rise and fall. Others joined him, first a trickle, then a wave, until half the hall was applauding, moved by words they hadn't expected from a wolf they'd written off as inconsequential. Kristoff Ironjaw snarled, his patience exhausted. Pretty words from a pretty puppet, but this kingdom needs more than speeches and sentiment. He turned to Marcus, his challenge clear. "I invoke the right of contest, Alpha King. Face me in single combat, with your bond as the wager. If you lose, you renounce your mate and choose one worthy of your station. If you win," his smile was sharp as broken glass, "well, you won't win." The hall erupted. Marcus rose from his throne like a storm-given form, his gray eyes blazing gold, his power filling the air until it was hard to breathe. "You dare," he said, his voice quiet and absolutely lethal. "Come into my hall, insult my mate, and challenge me." "I do," Kristoff replied, unmoved, "because someone must remind you what it means to be king." Marcus descended from the dais with predatory grace, every line of his body speaking of violence barely leashed. Maeve reached for him through the bond, pouring calm and confidence into the connection, reminding him without words that she believed in him, that she trusted him, that she loved him beyond reason. The contest was set for 3 days hence, in the ancient arena north of the castle, where challenges had been settled since before memory. Marcus spent those days training, his movements sharp and brutal, working out his rage on practice dummies and sparring partners who invariably ended up on their backs. But every night, he came to Maeve's chambers, and they would sit before her fire, and he would hold her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. "Promise me," he said on the night before the fight, his voice rough with exhaustion, "that if something happens, if I fail, you'll fight for yourself. You'll run if you have to. You'll find a way to be safe and free." "Nothing is going to happen," Maeve said, her hands framing his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You are the strongest wolf I have ever met. You are the Alpha King. And you are fighting for something that matters more than pride or politics. You're fighting for us." Marcus closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "If I lose you," he whispered, "I lose everything that makes this life worth living." "Then don't lose," Maeve said simply. The day of the contest dawned cold and bright, winter sun glittering off fresh snow, the sky an impossible blue. Thousands of wolves gathered at the arena, packed into stone stands that had stood for centuries, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Maeve sat in a place of honor, wrapped in furs, her white hair unbound and streaming down her back like a banner of moonlight. Marcus and Kristoff faced each other in the center of the arena, 2 apex predators, 2 embodiments of raw power. They had been allowed to strip down to fighting leather, and Maeve saw for the first time the full evidence of Marcus's warrior life. The scars that crisscrossed his chest and back, the ripple of muscle beneath tanned skin, the way he moved with the confident grace of someone who had danced with death and always emerged victorious. But Kristoff was formidable too, older than Marcus by perhaps 10 years, battle-scarred and vicious, fighting not for love, but for the old ways, for a vision of the world where everything had its place, and Omegas knew better than to dream. The fight began at dawn's first light. It was brutal and bloody and utterly without mercy. The sound of flesh striking flesh echoed across the arena like war drums. Marcus fought with controlled fury, every strike precise, every defense calculated. But Kristoff was relentless, absorbing punishment that would have felled lesser wolves, and coming back for more. They circled each other, broke apart, came together again in collisions that shook the frozen ground. Blood stained the snow. Maeve gripped the edge of her seat, feeling every blow through the bond, feeling Marcus's pain and determination, and unwavering focus. She poured everything she had into their connection, her love, her faith, her absolute certainty that he would prevail. And she felt him draw on it, felt him take strength from the knowledge that she was there, watching, believing, loving him with every fiber of her being. The fight raged for what felt like hours, but was perhaps only one. Finally, when both fighters were bloodied and exhausted, when the sun had climbed high enough to cast sharp shadows, Marcus saw his opening. Kristoff had overextended on a strike, had left his left side vulnerable for just a heartbeat, and Marcus moved with speed that seemed impossible for someone his size. He was inside Kristoff's guard, his hand closing around the other alpha's throat, driving him backward and down, slamming him into the frozen earth with force that cracked the ground beneath them. Marcus's other hand shifted, claws extending, pressing against Kristoff's jugular with just enough pressure to draw blood. His eyes blazed gold, his wolf fully present, dominant and absolute. "Yield," he commanded, his voice carrying across the silent arena. Kristoff struggled for a moment, pride warring with survival instinct. Then finally, he bared his throat in submission, the ancient gesture of surrender. "I yield," he said, the words bitter on his tongue. Marcus held him there for a heartbeat longer, making sure the submission was witnessed by everyone present. And then he released him and stood. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, swaying slightly on his feet, but he stood tall and turned to face the crowd. His eyes found Maeve immediately, and the look on his face, fierce and triumphant and utterly devoted, stole her breath. "Maeve Wolfsong is my mate," he declared, his voice strong despite his exhaustion. "My chosen, my equal. And anyone who questions that, anyone who insults her, anyone who suggests she is less than worthy answers to me. Is that understood?" The arena erupted in roars of approval, the sound shaking the very stones. Wolves howled their allegiance, recognizing in Marcus not just strength but conviction, not just power, but passion. Even Kristoff, still lying in the snow, inclined his head in acknowledgement of defeat. Maeve ran down from her seat, heedless of protocol or dignity, and threw herself into Marcus's arms. He caught her, holding her close despite his injuries, his face buried in her hair. "You believed in me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I felt you through the bond. I felt you keeping me strong." "Always," Maeve whispered against his chest, feeling the rapid thunder of his heart. "I will always believe in you." They stayed like that, wrapped in each other while the crowd celebrated around them, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had fought for their right to love, who had proven that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is not violence or dominance, but connection. The weeks that followed were quieter, but no less transformative. With Kristoff's challenge defeated, opposition to Maeve's presence largely melted away. Those who had questioned her found themselves reconsidering as they watched how she moved through the castle, speaking with servants and nobles alike, remembering names, asking about families, bringing warmth to corners that had been cold for years. She had a gift for seeing people, really seeing them, and those who had felt invisible began to feel valued in her presence. Marcus watched her with something close to awe. One evening, he found her in the kitchens, helping prepare food for the winter festival, her hands flour-dusted, her laughter bright as she shared jokes with the cooks. She shouldn't have been there, by all rights. A queen, even a future queen, belonged in the upper chambers, attending to important matters, not kneading bread with servants. But as Marcus leaned against the doorframe watching her, seeing how the entire kitchen staff had relaxed in her presence, seeing how joy had crept back into a space that had been merely functional for years, he understood. This was her strength. This was her power. Not in commanding from above, but in standing beside. In making everyone feel seen and valued and important. She noticed him watching and smiled. That special smile she reserved only for him. The one that made his heart clench and his wolf purr with satisfaction. "Come help," she called, beckoning him forward. "Your hands are bigger. You can knead faster." The kitchen staff froze, horrified at the prospect of the Alpha King being asked to do servant's work. But Marcus surprised them all by pushing off the doorframe, crossing to where Maeve stood, and rolling up his sleeves. "Show me," he said simply. Maeve's eyes lit up with delight. She took his large, scarred hands and placed them on the mound of dough, covering them with her own smaller ones, guiding his movements. "Like this," she said, firm but gentle. "You're persuading it, not fighting it." "Persuading bread," Marcus said dryly. but there was warmth in his eyes. "The things you teach me." "Important things," Maeve insisted. "Foundational things." Besides, she leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "I like your hands." Marcus's breath caught. "Maeve Wolf's song, you're dangerous," he murmured. "Only to you," she replied, her smile impish, her gray-green eyes sparkling. The kitchen staff exchanged glances, some shocked, some delighted. They had never seen their king like this, relaxed and almost playful, his harsh edges smoothed by the presence of the white-haired Omega, who had somehow tamed the most powerful wolf in the realm. As winter deepened and the solstice approached, Marcus announced their official bonding ceremony. It would take place on the longest night of the year, under the full moon, in the ancient grove where his ancestors had performed the same ritual for 1,000 years. The entire kingdom was invited. Every pack, every territory, every wolf who wished to witness the union of their king and his chosen mate. Maeve spent the days before the ceremony in a state of nervous excitement. Court seamstresses created a gown for her unlike anything she'd ever imagined. White silk that seemed to glow in lamplight, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that echoed the stars. They wove crystals into her hair, painted her lips pale rose, and when Maeve looked at herself in the mirror on the evening of the ceremony, she barely recognized the ethereal creature staring back. Marcus came to her chambers as the sun set, resplendent in formal attire, black leather and dark furs that made him look even more like some ancient warrior king from legend. But when he saw her, he stopped in the doorway, his gray eyes widening, his breath escaping in a soft sound of wonder. "Maeve," he said, and it was prayer and plea and promise all at once. She turned to face him fully, suddenly shy. "Is it too much?" she asked. "I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." Marcus crossed to her in 3 long strides, taking her hands in his. "You're not pretending," he said fiercely. "This is who you always were. I'm just grateful the rest of the world finally gets to see it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate pendant, a silver wolf caught mid-howl, suspended on a chain so fine it looked like spider silk. She wore it at her own bonding ceremony. My father gave it to her as a symbol of their union. He met Maeve's eyes, his own shimmering with emotion. "I want you to have it. I want you to carry a piece of my family, my history, as you become part of it." Maeve couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She simply turned, lifting her hair so Marcus could fasten the pendant around her neck. His fingers were gentle against her skin, the pendant settling just above her heart, warm as though it had been waiting for her all along. When she turned back, Marcus cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said. "I will love you until the stars go dark and the world ends and beyond. You are my mate, my heart, my home. And tonight, I get to tell the entire realm that you're mine." The ceremony took place in a clearing deep in the ancient forest, ringed by standing stones that predated written history. A massive bonfire burned at the center, sending sparks spiraling up to meet the stars. Thousands of wolves gathered in concentric circles around the stones, their eyes reflecting firelight, their voices hushed with reverence. Maeve and Marcus walked into the clearing together, hand in hand, and a hush fell over the assembled crowd. The pack shaman, an ancient she-wolf, whose eyes were white with cataracts but saw more than most, stood waiting by the fire. She smiled as they approached, her weathered face creasing with genuine joy. "Alpha King," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "You bring your chosen mate before the pack, before the moon, before the ancient powers. Do you swear to honor her, protect her, cherish her, for all the days of your life?" "I swear it," Marcus said, his voice ringing clear and true. "On my life, on my pack, on everything I am and everything I will be, I swear it." The shaman turned to Maeve. "Omega, you bring your heart to the Alpha King, offering him loyalty, devotion, and love. Do you swear to stand beside him, support him, challenge him when he strays, for all the days of your life?" "I swear it," Maeve said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "With everything I have, everything I am, I swear it." The shaman gestured them forward. "Then let the bond be sealed in the old way. Let the moon witness, let the pack witness. Let love be made law and law be made love." She produced a ceremonial blade, ancient and etched with runes. She made a small cut on Marcus's palm, then on Maeve's, and pressed their hands together, blood to blood. Immediately, the bond between them flared brilliant gold, visible for just a moment to every wolf present, a thread of light connecting their hearts, binding their souls. The crowd erupted in howls that shook the very trees, wolves of every age and rank celebrating the union of their king and his mate. Marcus pulled Maeve close, kissing her deeply, tasting salt from her tears, feeling her smile against his lips. The world faded until there was only them, only this moment, only the perfect rightness of finally, completely belonging to each other. When they finally pulled apart, the shaman placed a circlet of silver on Maeve's head, marking her officially as queen. The crowd roared its approval, and Maeve looked out at thousands of faces, no longer invisible, no longer small, but seen and celebrated and loved. That night, after the feast and the dancing and the endless stream of well-wishers, Marcus carried Maeve to their shared chambers, the rooms that had been prepared for them as a joined unit, not as separate beings, but as one. He set her down carefully at the threshold, then swept her back up into his arms, carrying her over in the traditional way. "Hello, wife," he murmured against her ear. "Hello, husband," she replied, joy bubbling up in her chest like champagne. He kicked the door closed behind them, sealing them away from the world, creating a sanctuary where nothing existed but the two of them and the bond that sang between them, strong and bright and eternal. They came together with hunger and tenderness, passion and reverence, two halves of a whole finally, perfectly complete. Later, as they lay tangled together in silk sheets, the fire burning low in the hearth, Maeve traced the scars on Marcus's chest, each one a story, each one a battle survived. "I never imagined this," she whispered, "any of this. A few months ago I was nothing, invisible, forgotten, and now I'm here, with you, and it feels like a dream I'm afraid to wake from." Marcus caught her hand, pressing it flat against his heart so she could feel its steady beat. "You were never nothing," he said fiercely. "The world was just too blind to see you. But I see you, Maeve. I have always seen you. From that first moment in the Great Hall, I saw everything you are, everything you could be, everything you were meant to be. And this," his arms tightened around her, pulling her impossibly closer. "This is not a dream. This is real. You are my queen, my mate, my love. And I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." Maeve pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, feeling safe in a way she'd never felt before. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much it frightens me." "Don't be frightened," Marcus murmured, his lips brushing her forehead. "Love is the one thing in this world worth the fear, worth the risk, worth everything." They drifted into sleep like that, wrapped around each other, the bond between them glowing soft gold even in darkness, a light that would never dim, a connection that would never break. Proof that sometimes fate was kinder than anyone had the right to expect. And love, real love, could transform everything. In the months that followed, Maeve proved herself as queen in ways that surprised even Marcus. She established schools for Omega children, ensuring they learned to read and write and understand their own worth. She created councils where wolves of all designations could bring concerns directly to the throne, breaking down barriers that had existed for generations. She walked through the kingdom's poorest territories, not as a distant monarch, but as someone who understood struggle, who had lived on the margins, who knew what it meant to be overlooked. Marcus watched her grow into her power with a pride that threatened to overwhelm him, but he also watched the toll it took, the exhaustion that crept into her eyes after long days of hearings and negotiations, the way she sometimes pushed herself beyond safe limits because she felt she had something to prove. One evening, he found her in her study, poring over documents by candlelight, her white hair falling forward to hide her face. The hour was late, the castle quiet. "Come to bed," he said gently from the doorway. "In a moment," Maeve replied, not looking up. "I just need to finish reviewing these trade agreements." Marcus crossed the room and carefully removed the parchment from her hands, setting it aside despite her protest. "Maeve," he said, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. "You're allowed to rest. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone." "I'm not trying to prove myself," Maeve said, but even she could hear the lie in her voice. "Yes, you are," Marcus said gently. "You're trying to prove you deserve to be here, that you're worth the bond, that you're enough." His thumb stroked across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "But you don't need to prove any of that. You are enough, Maeve. You were enough when you were serving wine in the Great Hall, and you're enough now. The crown doesn't make you valuable. Your heart makes you valuable. Your compassion, your courage, those things were always there, and they're more than enough." The words broke something open inside her, all the pressure and fear and doubt she'd been carrying, and she collapsed forward into his arms, sobbing against his chest while he held her, one hand stroking her hair, his voice a low rumble of comfort and reassurance. Later, as they lay in their bed with moonlight spilling through the windows, Maeve said quietly, "Sometimes I'm still afraid this will all be taken away, that I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream, that I don't really deserve you." Marcus rolled to face her, his gray eyes intense in the darkness. "Then let me tell you something, and I need you to really hear it." His hand found hers under the covers, their fingers lacing together. "I am the one who doesn't deserve you. You took a man who was hard and cold and brutal, a man who had forgotten how to be anything but a weapon, and you reminded him how to feel, how to laugh, how to hope. You made me believe in something beyond duty and obligation. You made me remember what it means to be alive. So no, Maeve, you don't deserve me. I'm the one trying every day to be worthy of you." Tears slipped down Maeve's cheeks, but she was smiling. "We're both idiots," she said. "Perhaps," Marcus agreed, a smile tugging at his lips. "But we're idiots together, and that makes all the difference." Spring came slowly to the kingdom, ice giving way to flowing water, snow melting to reveal earth eager for warmth. With the thaw came news that Maeve had suspected for weeks, but hadn't dared speak aloud. She was pregnant, carrying the heir to the throne, a child born of the bond that everyone had said was impossible. When she told Marcus, he simply stood there for a long moment, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, and then he laughed, a sound of pure joy that Maeve had never heard from him before. He swept her into his arms, spinning her once before setting her down carefully, suddenly terrified he might hurt her, or the precious life growing within her. "A child," he breathed, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "Our child." "Are you happy?" Maeve asked, though she could feel his joy through the bond, bright and overwhelming. "Happy," Marcus repeated, and then he laughed again, shaking his head. "Maeve, I don't have words for what I am. Terrified, grateful, amazed. You're giving me everything I never knew I wanted. A mate, a family, a future beyond war and strategy and survival. You're giving me a reason to hope." The pregnancy progressed peacefully, and Maeve bloomed with it, her white hair seeming to glow brighter, her skin luminous, her smile radiant. Marcus became impossibly more protective, hovering constantly, driving her to exasperation and laughter in equal measure. He insisted she rest more, work less, let others handle things she was perfectly capable of handling herself. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Maeve told him one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from climbing stairs. "I know," Marcus said, looking genuinely distressed. "But what if you fall? What if something happens?" "I can't," his voice broke slightly. "I can't lose you, Maeve. Either of you." She softened, seeing the real fear beneath his overprotectiveness. She took his hand and placed it on her rounded belly, holding it there until he felt the flutter of movement beneath his palm, their child responding to his touch. "Feel that," she said gently. "That's our baby, strong and healthy and safe. And I'm strong too, Marcus. I'm not fragile. Trust me to know my limits." Marcus closed his eyes, breathing deeply, centering himself. "You're right," he said finally. "I'm sorry. It's just, the bond makes me feel everything you feel, and the thought of you in pain, of something going wrong," he shook his head. "It undoes me." "Then have faith," Maeve said. "In me, in us, in this." The birth came on a summer night when the moon was full and the air was thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers. It was hard and painful and primal, and Marcus stayed with her through all of it, holding her hand, letting her squeeze until bones creaked, murmuring encouragement and devotion and promises that they would get through this together. When their daughter finally emerged, screaming her fury at the world with impressive volume, Marcus wept openly, something he had not done since he was a child. The midwives cleaned the baby and placed her in Maeve's arms, and they both stared down at the miracle they'd created. A perfect tiny being with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would likely turn gray. A blend of both her parents, proof that their impossible bond had created something beautiful. "What should we name her?" Marcus asked, his voice rough with emotion. Maeve looked down at her daughter, at the fierce little face, at the tiny fist that had already closed around her finger with surprising strength. "Lyra," she said softly, "after the constellation. Because she's our guiding star." "Lyra," Marcus repeated, testing the name, and smiled. "Perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect." He leaned down, kissing Maeve's forehead, his hand gentle on their daughter's head. "Thank you," he whispered, "for this, for everything, for being brave enough to love me." The years that followed were full and rich, challenges and triumphs woven together into a tapestry of life fully lived. They raised Lyra with love and wisdom, teaching her to be strong but kind, powerful but compassionate, a leader who understood both privilege and responsibility. When Lyra was 3 years old, still small but fierce as her father, Maeve found Marcus in the training yard one afternoon, his sword lowered, his shoulders tense. She knew that posture, recognized the weight that sometimes still settled on him like a physical thing. She approached quietly, and when she was close enough, she simply took his hand. "You're thinking about your father," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Marcus's jaw tightened. "He should be here," he said, his voice rough. "To see her. To see all of this. To know that the kingdom he died protecting is thriving. That his son found," he paused, swallowing hard, "found happiness. Something I never thought possible." Maeve squeezed his hand. "He knows," she said with quiet certainty. "Wherever he is, whatever comes after, he knows. And he's proud of you, Marcus, of the king you've become, of the father you are, of the man who learned that strength and gentleness aren't opposites, but partners." Marcus pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent, letting her presence ground him as it always did. "How do you always know?" he murmured. How do you always know exactly what I need to hear? Because I know you, Maeve said simply. Because the bond lets me feel your heart as clearly as my own. Because loving you has taught me to see past the armor to the man beneath. And that man, Marcus Dawnreaver, is the best person I know. He held her there for a long time, the sounds of the training yard fading around them, until Lyra's voice called out, bright and demanding. Papa, Mama, come see. I climbed the big tree all by myself. They pulled apart, smiling at each other, and went to admire their daughter's accomplishment. Marcus swinging Lyra onto his shoulders while she crowed with delight. Maeve walking beside them with her hand on Marcus's arm. A complete unit. A family. 2 years later, their first son was born during a spring storm. Thunder shaking the castle walls as Maeve labored. They named him Aldrich, after the old lord who had been first to applaud Maeve's speech, who had become a trusted advisor and friend. The boy had Marcus's dark hair and Maeve's gray-green eyes, and from his first breath, he was curious about everything, constantly exploring, constantly questioning, constantly seeking to understand the world around him. Marcus adapted to fatherhood of 2 with surprising grace, though Maeve often found him standing in the nursery late at night, watching his children sleep with an expression of wonder and fear mingled on his face. What if I fail them? He asked one such night, his voice barely above a whisper. What if I'm too hard, too distant, too much like the weapon I had to become? Maeve moved to stand beside him, her arm slipping around his waist. You won't, she said, because you're aware of the danger, because you question yourself, because you love them so fiercely it terrifies you. That fear, Marcus, that's what will make you a good father. It will keep you present, keep you trying, keep you growing. Their second son came 3 years after Aldrich, born on the winter solstice, arriving so quickly the midwives barely made it in time. They named him Fennec, and he was quieter than his siblings, more introspective, but with a smile that could light up entire rooms and a gentle nature that reminded Maeve of herself. Marcus doted on him especially, perhaps seeing in Fennec's softness something that needed extra protection in a world that often mistook gentleness for weakness. And then, when Maeve was 30, when they thought their family complete, she became pregnant once more. This final child, another daughter, was born on a summer evening when fireflies danced in the gardens and the air smelled of honeysuckle and hope. They named her Aria, because her first cry had been musical, and because she seemed to sing her way through life, finding joy in everything, spreading light wherever she went. 4 children, 4 souls they had brought into the world, each one unique, each one precious, each one proof that their impossible bond had created something extraordinary. The castle that had once been cold and silent now rang with laughter and running footsteps, with arguments and reconciliations, with all the beautiful chaos of a family truly living. Marcus proved himself a devoted father, fierce in protection, but warm in affection. He taught Lyra and Aldrich to fight, spending hours in the training yard drilling them in defense and strategy, but he also taught them to think, to question, to consider the weight of their actions. He taught Fennec to trust his intuition, to value his gentle nature as a strength rather than a weakness. And he taught Aria to be brave, to speak her mind, to understand that her voice mattered. But it was in the quiet moments that his transformation was most evident. Maeve would find him reading stories to the children before bed, doing different voices for each character, making them giggle with his exaggerated expressions. She would catch him dancing with Aria in the gardens, her small feet balanced on his boots as he waltzed her in circles. She would watch him listen, really listen, when Fennec spoke about his dreams or his fears, giving his quiet son the same attention he'd give a general reporting battle plans. One evening, when the children were finally asleep after much protest and negotiation, Marcus and Maeve sat before the fire in their chambers, Maeve's head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Do you remember?" Maeve said softly. When you told me you were alone, even surrounded by thousands. Marcus's arm tightened around her. I remember. Are you still alone? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he pressed a kiss to the top of her head. No, he said. I haven't been alone since the moment you looked up at me in that great hall. You filled every empty space inside me, Maeve. You and our children. You gave me a family, a home, a life worth living. I'm not alone anymore. I don't think I ever could be again, as long as I have you. Maeve turned to look at him, seeing the truth of his words written in his gray eyes. You were always worthy of love, Marcus, she said. You were always worthy of family and joy and peace. You just needed someone to show you. And you showed me, he replied, cupping her face gently. Every single day, you show me. How to be soft without being weak. How to love without losing myself. How to lead with both strength and compassion. You made me better, Maeve. You made me whole. As their children grew, the challenges evolved. Lyra, at 12, began showing signs of alpha dominance that both thrilled and terrified Marcus. She was strong-willed and fearless, quick to defend those weaker than herself, but also quick to temper, prone to making decisions without considering consequences. One afternoon, Maeve found Marcus and Lyra in the study, clearly in the aftermath of an argument. Lyra's jaw was set in stubborn defiance, her dark hair wild around her face. Marcus looked exhausted, his hand rubbing the back of his neck in frustration. She challenged a visiting alpha twice her age because he made a dismissive comment about omegas, Marcus said when he saw Maeve. She could have started a diplomatic incident. He was wrong, Lyra shot back, her voice fierce, and someone needed to tell him so. Maeve looked between her daughter and her husband, seeing so much of Marcus in Lyra's defiance, so much of herself in Lyra's defense of the overlooked. She moved to sit beside her daughter, taking her hand. You're not wrong to be angry, she said gently. And you're not wrong to speak up when you see injustice. But strength without strategy is just violence, Lyra. Your father has spent years building alliances, earning respect, creating a kingdom where people like me, where omegas, have rights and dignity. One impulsive challenge, no matter how righteous, can undo years of patient work. Lyra's eyes, so like her father's, filled with frustrated tears. But it's not fair, she said. Why should we have to be patient? Why should we have to be careful? Why can't we just make things right by force? Marcus knelt before his daughter, his large hands gentle on her shoulders. Because force creates resentment, he said. Force creates enemies. I learned that the hard way, Lyra. I spent years ruling by fear and domination, and you know what it got me. Obedience, yes. Respect of a sort. But no loyalty, no love, no real change. His gray eyes held hers. It was your mother who taught me that real strength is patient. Real power is knowing when to fight and when to persuade. Real leadership is understanding that lasting change comes from changed hearts, not broken wills. Lyra looked between her parents, her expression conflicted. So, what do I do? She asked finally. When I see something wrong, what do I do? You speak your truth, Maeve said, but you speak it with wisdom. You challenge, but you challenge with purpose. You fight, but you fight battles you can win in ways that create more allies than enemies. She squeezed her daughter's hand. You have your father's strength and your mother's heart, Lyra. That combination, used wisely, can change the world, but used recklessly, it can destroy everything we've built. The conversation marked a turning point for Lyra. She began to watch her parents more carefully, to see how they navigated conflicts, how they built consensus, how they wielded power with both strength and grace. She learned, slowly, that being strong didn't mean being hard, that leadership required both courage and compassion. Aldrich presented different challenges. As the eldest son, he felt the weight of expectation, the pressure to be perfect, to live up to the legacy of his father and the reputation of his mother. Maeve found him one night in the library, hunched over books on strategy and governance, his young face creased with stress beyond his years. "You should be sleeping," she said gently, sitting beside him. "I need to learn," Aldrich replied without looking up. "I need to be ready, to be worthy." "Worthy of what?" Maeve asked. "Of being your son," he said simply, and the words broke her heart. "Of being his heir. Everyone expects me to be like father, strong and fearless and perfect. But I'm not perfect, Mama. I'm afraid sometimes. I make mistakes. What if I'm not good enough?" Maeve turned her son to face her, her hands gentle on his cheeks. "Listen to me, Aldrich. Your father is not perfect. I am not perfect. No one is. The expectation of perfection is a cage that will destroy you from the inside if you let it." His gray-green eyes, so like hers, swam with tears. "What matters is not that you never make mistakes, but that you learn from them, that you try, that you care, that you lead with both your head and your heart." "But what if I fail?" he whispered. "Then you get back up," Maeve said firmly. "You learn, you grow, you try again. Failure is not the opposite of success, my darling. It's part of the path to it. Your father failed more times than you know before he became the king he is now. I failed countless times before I found my strength. Failure doesn't define you. How you respond to it does." She pulled him close, holding her firstborn son while he cried out years of accumulated pressure and fear. When Marcus found them an hour later, he simply joined them, wrapping his arms around both, adding his strength to hers, showing Aldrich without words that vulnerability was not weakness but trust, and trust was the foundation of everything that mattered. Other children followed, and their family became the heart of the kingdom, proof that love could be the foundation of power rather than its weakness. Maeve's sisters eventually came seeking forgiveness, humbled by time and circumstance, their own lives having taught them the value of what they'd once scorned. Maeve received them with grace, not because she'd forgotten their cruelty, but because she'd learned that holding on to bitterness only poisoned the holder. She gave them positions in her household, allowed them to rebuild their lives, and in time, they became some of her most loyal supporters, having learned through example what strength really looked like. The kingdom prospered under Marcus and Maeve's joint rule. He remained the fierce warrior when needed, the alpha king whose very name made enemies reconsider their actions. But he was also the man who danced with his daughter in the gardens, who read bedtime stories to his sons, who could often be found in the kitchens with his wife, kneading bread and stealing kisses when no one was looking. And Maeve, once invisible and overlooked, became a legend in her own right. They called her the White Queen, the Omega who had changed the world, the woman who had proven that power came in many forms, and the strongest bonds were built not on dominance, but on devotion. On their 10th anniversary, Marcus took Maeve back to the balcony where he'd first kissed her, where the bond had fully awakened between them. They stood looking out over the kingdom, older now but no less in love, the bond between them as bright and strong as ever. "Do you remember?" Marcus said, his arm around her waist, "when I told you that you'd unmade me?" "I remember," Maeve replied, leaning into his warmth. "I was wrong," Marcus said. "You didn't unmake me. You remade me into something better, something whole. You took a broken man and loved him until he remembered how to be human." Maeve turned in his arms to face him, her gray-green eyes meeting his gray ones, and smiled. "You did the same for me," she said. "You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I thought I was worthless. You loved me when I didn't know how to love myself. We saved each other, Marcus." He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers, and they stood there, as the sun set over their kingdom, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had fought for their love and won, who had built a life and a legacy on the simple but profound truth that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is a heart brave enough to love. Below them, in the castle gardens, they could hear their children playing, Lyra's voice raised in laughter as she chased her brothers, their youngest daughter's delighted squeals echoing off stone walls. The sound was music, the sweetest symphony, proof of everything they'd built together. "This," Marcus said softly, "this is what I was fighting for all those years without knowing it. Not territory or power or glory. This, a family, a home. You. And you have it," Maeve whispered. "We have it. Together." As the stars began to emerge overhead, Marcus and Maeve stayed on the balcony, wrapped in each other's arms, the bond between them glowing soft gold in the gathering darkness. They had faced trials and triumphs, doubt and devotion, loneliness and love. They had been tested and had emerged stronger, had been broken and had healed each other, had been lost and had found home. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The moon rose full and bright over the kingdom, blessing all who dwelled within its light, and in the castle, the Alpha King and his Omega Queen held each other close, two halves of a whole, bound by fate and choice and love that would endure until the stars themselves grew cold. They had been forced together by jealous sisters and political circumstance, but they had chosen each other, again and again, in every moment that mattered. And that choice, renewed daily through kindness and devotion and unwavering faith, had transformed everything. From nothing, they had built a kingdom. From loneliness, they had created family. From darkness, they had made light. And from a chance encounter in a great hall, they had forged a love that would echo through generations, a story that would be told for 1,000 years, a bond that death itself could not break. This was their triumph. This was their joy. This was their legacy. And it all began with a girl in a red dress, a king in shadows, and a bond that awakened like dawn, breaking over a world that had waited too long for morning. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.